G.E. Moore was a famous English philosopher. His years were 1873 to 1958. And today we'll talk about his theory of knowledge, his epistemology, specifically in his famous article called Proof of an External World from 1939. But before we get to Moore, let's remember where we are with Descartes. Remember, Descartes' aim was to refute skepticism. But you might have think that he didn't refute skepticism, as we saw last time. Remember, the one thing you can know is that you exist. So I know that I exist, and I don't really know what I am. Am I a soul or a body? Well, whatever I am, I exist. I know that now, according to Descartes. Is there anything else you can know? Well, it's not obvious what else you might be able to know. You might think you could know the current contents of your thoughts, like I'm in pain. But it's hard to see how you could get from I exist or I'm in pain or from it seems to me that there's a tree over there to having knowledge that there is a tree over there. So how can you get knowledge of the external world, that is the world beyond your mind? How can you get knowledge about that? It's not clear. Descartes has an argument um, for how we have that knowledge, but it's not accepted by most philosophers. Let me sketch this out in terms of sensory perception, and then talk about some of the developments in philosophy that happened after Descartes. You need this kind of as background to see what Moore is reacting against. So, in the 18th century, a lot of philosophers believed in a certain uh, model of perception that you could call indirect realism. And it works like this. So there's an apple, and this apple interacts with your body, say your eyes. Um, but you don't perceive the apple directly. What you perceive directly is an apple image. And you perceive the apple indirectly by way of the image. Okay, so the image is supposed to resemble and also be caused by the apple. And it's because the apple image resembles and is caused by the real apple out in the world, the mind-independent apple, the apple that would exist whether or not anybody was conscious or whether or not anybody was aware of it. The reason that the apple image represents the apple is because it resembles it and is caused by it. It's supposed to resemble it and be caused by it. Now, and this is called indirect realism about perception. And many great philosophers have defended something like this. But if you accept this, it's pretty easy to see how skeptical concerns can get going. So we just ask ourselves, how do we know that the image, the apple image, this mind-dependent episode of consciousness, how do we know that it resembles the apple? And you might say, well, we can't know that it resembles the apple if you're only aware of the one item. you can't compare the one item to the second item and say if they resemble each other. So we're aware of a certain sort of visual image, but we're not directly aware, according to this theory, of the apple itself. And because of that, how could we know that one is like the other? Furthermore, how can we know that the apple causes the apple image? Maybe the apple image is caused by something else that's not at all like an apple. So you start to worry about whether our knowledge really goes beyond just what's in our own mind. And so a number of skeptical philosophers raised problems about this. The standout among them would be David Hume, the Scottish philosopher who died in 1776. Okay, so let's bring in the legacy of Immanuel Kant now. Remember Kant from Ethics. Kant's years are 1724 to 1804. And he rejects this sort of indirect realism. And his solution is to say this. So Kant's solution, I'll put that in scare quotes though, to skepticism is to say all knowledge is of appearances. So he says, yes, all human knowledge is of mind-dependent realities, and that's how he understood all of science, actually. Science is dealing with mind-dependent realities. So, in Kant's own terminology, we experience only the phenomenal realm. So he agrees with the indirect realist that the only thing that you directly perceive is an apple as it appears, or an apple appearance. But what you're perceiving then is mind dependent. It's partly constituted by our minds, but it's the result of our minds interacting with something. So he assumes there's something out there. He calls that the realm of things in themselves. Things as they are apart from any perception. He calls that the noumenal realm, as opposed to the phenomenal realm. And he says all human knowledge is of this. It's of the realm of appearances. And there isn't any knowledge about things in themselves. Now, philosophers differ quite a bit on whether or not this is a real solution, or whether Kant has just given up the game to skepticism and just admitted that they're right. But my point is that in the 19th century, so in the 1800s, Kant was very influential, and he left a legacy in European philosophy, especially of non-realist epistemology, which held that human knowledge is confined to the mind dependent, to a realm of realities which exist in part because they're perceived. Now, something very strange and disturbing happened after this in European philosophy. Remember, Kant says that all of our knowledge is confined to the phenomena. And I should probably draw the apple like this to connote that it's mental. It's an appearance. and you have direct knowledge only of that. Now, Kant thought that's all we knew, but Kant also pretty clearly supposes that there is a noumenal apple, the apple as it is in itself, and that somehow, in conjunction with the form of our minds, this results in the apple as it appears, in the phenomenal apple. Later philosophers said, wait a second, we only can know the realm of appearances, and there are no grounds on which to say there's a whole nother realm of objects, the whole nother noumenal realm of things in themselves. And moreover, look, it's complicated to suppose that there are a whole bunch of noumenal things out there. You know, maybe one for each idea that we have. So here's a flower idea. Or there's the flower appearance, and there's the flower. And we normally assume that flower visual images, flower appearances, are caused by flowers. But look, here's a simpler procedure. If we really can't know anything beyond this subjective realm, beyond phenomena, it's simpler just to suppose that there's one thing here, one entity. Call it the absolute. That's what some of these philosophers did call it. Why don't you suppose that there's really one thing in itself, one noumenal reality, one thing which lies behind all experiences? Well, we've gotten pretty far from common sense there, haven't we? Now, by the end of the 19th century, this was all the rage in philosophy. It was called, actually, in England and America, absolute idealism. Idealism in that the world that we experience, the cosmos, the chair you're sitting in, the table in front of you, the door, the window, the building, those are all mind-dependent entities. They're all appearances. They're all ideas in a sense. But there's also this absolute, this one maybe indescribable thing which lies behind all experience, but about which we can't have knowledge. This was the dominant philosophy in a lot of Europe, and also in England and in America. And G.E. Moore thought this was outrageous. According to these guys, you can't know that there are external things. If by a physical thing you mean something that exists whether or not anybody's thinking about it, then you can't know that there exists a single physical object. Because again, they assumed, like Kant, that all our experience is of appearances. So this did not suit Moore, as it doesn't suit a lot of people, and Moore was interested in refuting this kind of philosophy.